Even an announcement like RFK's plan, I think, was to buy 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years, 200,000 a year. Well, if they got their first 200,000 and 2 other countries decided then that they wanted to get 200,000 too, like this is absolutely the God candle scenario. And I think you can't announce a 5-year plan like that and not be ready for it to have to unfold over the next 5 days, because this is how fast it can turn, totally.
And do you have any quick thoughts on nation state FOMO?
Yeah, gradually and suddenly. You know, I think there's lots of talk about this idea of a BRICS currency, and what people aren't thinking about is, or at least that they're not talking openly about, is if it's going to be a commodity backed, if they're going to try to do anything that is underpinned by something else, it's going to have to be Bitcoin because of the problem of verifying the reserves, right? And so I think that the problem of trust is why Bitcoin is the solution for every country will need a strategic reserve if they're not already building one now. So I think there's enough people talking about at a nation state level in the US that it's a matter of when, not if. Pennsylvania just announced that they are, because this is the other thing I think people need to think about with national strategic reserve at the US level. And secondly, if the US does it, everyone will have to immediately do it.
Immediately.
I can't see how you can't, right? If the US, if the US takes too long to make it a formal decision at the federal level, and in the meantime, 10 states follow Pennsylvania and they start doing it on their own, there's just only so much Bitcoin to go around, right? So the states within the US are almost in some ways their own mini countries, right? So if they on their own start stacking, they can kick off an arms race and almost force the US to make a federal level decision. And if that happens, I mean, like Russia and China can't dare be flat-footed and not have their own position, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that this is something that happens like in 2025.
When you say immediately, what goes through my mind, this is just me. I'm a hyperbole. Like, I genuinely believe Samson Mao's idea of this God candle. I expect Bitcoin to do that. I just don't know when. But the idea of 10 other nation states, or even just 10 states in the US trying to front run some sort of federal law that might get put into office when Trump finally gets into office, I can see those as being catalysts for Bitcoin really surprising people on the upside quickly. Like,
yeah.
What do you think about, firstly, maybe just the God candle, this idea of Samson Mao saying we could see some really crazy things happen to the price of Bitcoin? Are these the catalysts? Are these enough catalysts to create something really crazy here?
Yeah, I mean, when you're talking about state buyers, it's an entirely different animal, and we really haven't seen, you know, sort of like unlimited financial resources put into chasing this finite thing. So yeah, I mean, I think it's like one of those, what do they say in fighting, where everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. This is how this could go. So getting like a 6-figure Bitcoin bag, the cost of that is going to go up exponentially. So even an announcement like RFK's plan, I think, was to buy 1 million Bitcoin over 5 years, 200,000 a year. Well, if they got their first 200,000 and 2 other countries decided then that they wanted to get 200,000 too, like this is absolutely the God candle scenario. And I think you can't announce a 5-year plan like that and not be ready for it to have to unfold over the next 5 days, because this is how fast it can turn, totally.
And that goes back to the idea of this FOMO, right? So if the US announces, hey, we want to do this, we want to buy 200,000 Bitcoin a year. Trump signs some sort of bill into office as soon as he gets in January. I'm still digesting what you said about things could happen immediately. You could see 10 other nation states also join in, and I agree with you. You would have to allocate to Bitcoin. Now, what scares me is the fact there's only 2 million Bitcoin on exchanges. How many nation states, how many states can, like you say, get that, 6-figure bag of Bitcoin? Are you talking about like 100,000 Bitcoin stack?
Yeah, and I mean, think about like The other thing that'll happen immediately if countries announce that they are going to start buying en masse is all of the opportunists out there that want to just make fiat money and or get some of their own Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is really the only thing where there's multiple types of actors that might have an interest in accumulating some. So forget about other countries, but what about if Apple decides at the same time that they want to establish corporate treasury? We have a situation right now where one company of significant size has amassed a decent amount of Bitcoin. Google, Facebook, like there's and these are just American-based companies. Mm-hmm. So think about all of the big companies that are in Russia or in Europe and in Brazil. I mean, like there really just isn't enough to go around. And then just regular billionaire rich people. Mm. So, I mean, there's like Ricardo Salinas, there's a handful of billionaires that have, started moving a lot of their wealth into Bitcoin. And there's a lot of billionaire wealth that, as far as we know, is not in Bitcoin. Mm-hmm. So I think that if the U.S. announced that they were going to buy, and I was a billionaire, I would probably buy a significant amount of Bitcoin just on the odds that it was going to happen. Mm. And so you could see a flood of actors pushing the price up like into astronomical numbers.
Mm. And it all goes back to Bitcoin scarcity. Like you say, Saylor has that significant amount of Bitcoin. He is sitting on 1% of the supply.
Yeah.
Again, I'm no fractions genius, but 1% means there's only another 99 people who can also buy a 1% stake like Saylor. And you're reeling off the different categories. Billionaires, there's 2,500 billionaires. There's 58,000 public companies.
Yeah.
They will all probably want that six-figure, I've never heard anyone call it that before, that six-figure stack of Bitcoin, 100,000 or more coins. I believe that's the new kind of benchmark. So people look at the billionaire benchmark in fiat land. Everybody doesn't care about being a millionaire anymore. It doesn't buy you anything. In Australia, you can't buy an average size home being a millionaire.
Everyone's a millionaire.
Everybody wants to be a billionaire.
Yeah.
That's right, everybody is a millionaire. I think in the Bitcoin space, I've never heard anyone talk about it before, but that six-figure stack of Bitcoin, 100,000 coins, I feel like that's going to be like, the new benchmark. That's the new kind of elite. And there's just not enough Bitcoin to go around for everybody to get to that category.
I mean, and the other thing is like, whatever the benchmark is, if it's 10,000 Bitcoin, you only get there by never selling your stack. Mm-hmm. So as more of entities try to accumulate stacks of that size, that's just more Bitcoin that is permanently out of circulation. Right? Not selling at any price. So where's it going to come from?
It's going to have to be a much higher price.
Much higher price.
I'm not selling mine for a long time. Now, this idea of, 100,000 Bitcoin or this idea of, 10,000 Bitcoin brings up an interesting idea. There's a little bit of a debate in the Bitcoin space. A little bit. So British Hodl, friend of the channel, he's urging everybody to get to 1 Bitcoin. Says you have to get to 1 Bitcoin. That's going to be your generational wealth. If you can get to the 1 Bitcoin, you own 1/21 millionth of all the Bitcoin that will ever be available. Some other people claim that you could actually be very well off, maybe even financially successful with less Bitcoin, 0.1 Bitcoin. I've even done some numbers showing that even 0.01 Bitcoin, 1% of a Bitcoin, could be an okay amount of wealth for the everyday Joe. Where do you sit on this debate? Is there a number in the back of your mind that says, okay, this is a great stacking number or a stacking goal for the everyday Joe to get to?
Yeah, I mean, I think that 1 is definitely a number that is already out of the reach of almost everyone because there's 60 million millionaires in the world. Yeah. And as the price appreciates with all these other actors, there's just no way that a millionaire would pay $500,000 for 1 Bitcoin. So the psychological unit bias is already excluded almost everybody. I think even at 100,000, modest sort of like low single-digit millionaires would probably balk at the price because they are probably for the most part still thinking about the asset as a fiat asset that they would then in the future trade for future more fiat. So if the opportunity to them seems like they've already late to the party or might have missed it, and this is the other thing I think, how do you measure what is a significant amount of Bitcoin when, in my mind, we're moving to a system where Bitcoin is the only money. I think in 2050, we're not going to be talking about a Bitcoin price in dollars. We're going to be just talking about Bitcoin being the only system of money in the world. And so how do you measure what is generational wealth as owning a percentage of all of the wealth in the world. I don't know. I think like having one Bitcoin in 2050, you won't be selling it ever, because we're moving to a world where central banking has become entirely decentralized, and the owners of significant amount of Bitcoin sort of pool that collateral together to create the infrastructure of a financial system that doesn't even yet exist. So this is going to be something that actually looks so different from today. We'll be moving sats in federations and on layers above Bitcoin, but like the significant bags of Bitcoin will sort of become this kind of like interlocking system of collateral that negates or replaces a lot of the functionality that central banks provide today through centralization.
So I've got more questions for you about billionaire FOMO, nation state FOMO. I actually want to park those to the side because you just mentioned something really interesting. Bitcoin's going to be the only money in the world in 2050. Whether the listener agrees or disagrees with that, I think it could be a useful thought experiment to just think about how that world works, because you've built a Bitcoin company that is thinking about this question. So I want to dive into that. Firstly, what are you building? And secondly, how is the product that you're building now going to work on a Bitcoin standard?
Yeah, so we are building tools for companies that want to start thinking about what running a company on a Bitcoin standard means for interacting with your employees. And everything is, in a post-Bitcoin world, really everything's going to work differently. So how we think about the number that you get paid, how you think about how regularly you get paid, like how we interact with being rewarded for specific kind of tasks. I think like all of these things that we do now are rooted in the fiat system. So we get paid every 2 weeks. This has to do with Henry Ford and assembly line manufacturing and the roots of kind of that 9-to-5 system that made a lot of sense 100 years ago, when what we're really trying to do was centralize everything. So the 20th century was an era of centralization where everything needed to be centralized to really facilitate the growth and emergence of a truly global economy. But now, as we move towards this sort of decentralized future, the systems now need to be rebuilt to work and function in this totally decentralized way. So this means that salaries may go down instead of up. If your money's appreciating instead of depreciating, you probably want it sooner rather than having to wait every 2 weeks. Like there are lots of like fundamental things that we're still sort of in this like transition period where the world is changing fast, but still really does work a lot like it worked in 1970, because the old systems really haven't been replaced yet. And what's needed to make that happen are really the tools for tomorrow that are going to like enable people to kind of like push through that 4-minute mile and start thinking about what's possible on the other side of this. So like in my mind, the first step is, if we understand that we're moving to a place where Bitcoin is the only money that people actually want, then why would you actually go to work to be paid in your government paper that you know is going to be worth less, censorable, can be confiscated at any time? If we flash forward 5 years, there might be a carbon allowance on that money that lets you tell you how much beef you can buy in a week. Nobody's going to want to earn that money. So you're going to need tools that are going to enable you to attract the employees that you want. And I believe that part of what is going to be involved in running a business in that world is you're going to have a way to pay people in the kind of money they're going to want to be paid in. And this is what we're building.
It's incredible. I've got 3 quick questions that I'm sure the listener probably has at this stage of the podcast, because we didn't do an introduction, we jumped straight into it.
Yeah.
So question number 1, name.
Yeah.
Scott Dedels.
Scott Dedels.
Okay, and you're building, name of the company?
The company is Block Rewards.
And it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Really fascinating. I heard about it last year when you interviewed me, and I thought, I've got to get Scott back on. It's taken me a year to do that, because we're in El Salvador right now. It's probably something else that people are wondering.
Yeah.
Where are you from, and how far did you travel to come down and speak at the conference? Because we're going to dive into what you just talked about here in El Salvador in a moment. But where'd you come from?
Yeah, I live in British Columbia, Canada. It's kind of not far from where I was born and raised. Got into Bitcoin in 2020 when the government Yep, Canada started censoring money and printing money like crazy. And at that point, my background is pension plan consulting. I've been in the financial sector, traditional financial world for most of my career. So I was very interested right away in what money printing would do to the bond markets, because pensions funds are heavily composed of bonds. And I kind of understood Bitcoin by accident. Originally, I thought it was going to be like insurance for pension plans. But the better I understood, the better I realized, like, no, this is the future of money. And that means to me that for as long as we're planning on working and earning money, we're going to be earning Bitcoin. We're going to be earning Bitcoin in every conceivable way that we earn regular money now. So this means tips, commissions, shifts, hourly, holiday bonuses, like everything that we do, every way that we interact with a workplace has to be Bitcoinized, just like everything else. The same way we think about how we're going to run businesses, how we're going to run economies. And earning Bitcoin is, in my mind, the most important use case for developing Bitcoin economies, because people don't tend to spend trinkets or souvenirs. Like if you're buying something because you think it's going to go up in price, you're not going to then take that thing and use it to buy a coffee. It's a totally different mentality, right? But if you have earned something in a workplace for work that you've done, those are the sats that you spend, right? Like when people pay me for my book in Bitcoin, that's the Bitcoin that I spend to give to other people who are creating and creating on Bitcoin. So, yeah, I mean, I think that earning Bitcoin is the most important, is really the missing link in the Bitcoin economy that hasn't really been thought of or solved yet.
Now, I wanted to quickly interrupt today's interview to give a massive shout out to our lead sponsor, Rhino Bitcoin. Rhino is a Bitcoin banking solution that combines traditional financial services with the power of Bitcoin. Created by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners, Rhino offers a range of different services. You can buy Bitcoin, you can sell Bitcoin, you can withdraw straight to cold storage, and you can even pay other people using the Bitcoin Lightning Network. You can also purchase gift cards with sats at the click of a button, and you can even connect a multi-signature setup to Casa, all by using the Rhino application. Additionally, you can even send cash globally to your family and friends using Rhino, and soon you'll be able to pay bills, borrow money against your Bitcoin, and even save Bitcoin for your retirement, all in the one seamless application. You guys can visit rhinobitcoin.com to download Rhino today and experience the future of Bitcoin banking.
Well, there's many interesting concepts in your book I want to dive into today. I think the first one was something you were telling me off here air a minute ago. You were saying a building is like a physical timestamp. I want to talk about this idea of time, value, and energy, because you kind of blew my mind about it 30 minutes ago, and I'm still digesting what you said. So I'm just going to give you the floor with that little rabbit hole there.
Yeah, this was kind of like how I first kind of really wrapped my mind around Bitcoin, because it's this idea that money is a representation of value. And but really money is a piece of paper with a picture of a royalty of a person who looks familiar to you. But this is what's different about the Bitcoin mining process, because in the Bitcoin mining process there are measurable inputs and a measurable output. So in Bitcoin mining, the inputs are energy, electrical energy, computation, and time. So energy and time go in, Bitcoin goes out. And so in this case, Bitcoin is a representation of energy and time, and this is why Bitcoin has value, right? And this is true of kind of all proof of work, right? So when we create anything, we have energy inputs and we have the time it takes to make the thing, and then the output is the thing. So this is very true for buildings. This is why I love art and architecture, because they're just a really simple way to objectively measure the energy that went in, which would be like the labor and the input costs, the materials, concrete, steel, glass, and then how long it took to make the building. So in the case of buildings, we have this beautiful timestamp, because buildings endure. And we have in the world now, buildings that are 10 years old, buildings that are 100 years old, buildings that are 1,000 years old. And this is what we see with the buildings that are older and that are certainly built to last, are the ones that have really endured, and like a special If you've traveled and the places that you go out of your way to see as a traveler are the ones that really have proof of work. They are stores of value, and this idea where value is a combination of time and energy. So the beautiful buildings have this combination of time and energy, which then becomes time-stamped to the moment they were made. And we can see forever with that building how much time and energy went into building a building of that quality at that exact moment in time. And then we can compare buildings across time and see how well they're storing value. They're storing time and energy.
Exactly. And just for those who want to know, the name of the book is The Tao of Bitcoin.
Yeah, so the Tao of Bitcoin doesn't really have anything to do with buildings, although I do talk about this concept a little bit. Taoism is an ancient Eastern philosophy that emerged out of China in sort of the 4th, 5th century BC and deals a lot with the concept of energy. And so the book has to do with the interconnectedness of all things, and it relates to the transfer of energy. Everything in Taoism is about the sort of like large scale cyclical process of nature, that everything in nature is in this ongoing process of death and rebirth, the seasonality of all things that emerges from like this central force of creation in the universe. This is what the Tao is. And so we are a part of this thing, and as human beings, we flow with energy to create things. Those things maybe then have a life cycle and they return back to creator, right? And all of this is energy. This is a transfer of energy. And it originally got me thinking that money itself is an exchange of energy. So when I give you money for something that you've made, you turned your energy into that thing when you made it. So I had to earn my money. So I turned my effort, my time, my energy into money, the money that I needed to give you to buy the thing that you made. It's an exchange of energy, right? So everything that we're doing, including exchanging money, is an exchange of energy. Everything that we build, every interaction we have, it's all energy. And so Bitcoin is as an intimate, it fits in really nicely with this concept. And because Bitcoin is money that is actually energy, this is why I think it is, there's a spiritual component to Bitcoin. We use this paper money, which has no connection to reality. It has no, fiat money has no energy, because there's no energy or time required to create it. And this is why it's actually not a store of value, because it's just a click of a button to make paper money.
Well, that's the triangle you're talking about.
Yeah. So,
something is of valuable, it's proportional to the time and the energy it takes to make.
That's right. Yeah, and so it's just as true for the other sides of the triangle. So value and time can help you understand how much energy would have been required to make that thing. Or value and energy could probably tell you how much time it took to do something. So it just makes sense that things should have this relationship. And this is part of the reason why I think it's so obvious with buildings, because you can just look at a building and see the quality of something. You can tell how long it took to make. And it's just so weird that with money, for some reason, we have disconnected to say, we're looking at this piece of paper that is obviously worthless and trying to convince ourselves that it has worth. And this is why I think Ride Circle's trying to figure out why nothing makes sense.
That's right. Not a lot in the world makes sense. I think Bitcoin is I believe, doing a good job at, making sense of the world. And I think Bitcoiners were called crazy in 2020, for example, for saying inflation wasn't transitory. And it's not transitory. It hasn't been transitory anywhere around the world. But that's probably a rabbit hole for a different day. I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of Renaissance 2.0, because this is what you were talking about yesterday here at the conference at Adopting Bitcoin. We talked a little bit about deflationary wages. That's a concept I think a lot of people might need to double click on, because a lot of people just aren't used to that. Most people are thinking of wage increases. But on a Bitcoin standard, a wage decrease might not even be a bad thing if the money's appreciating at X rate. So we talked about that. That's one thing that could be different in Renaissance 2.0. Another thing we've talked about that could be different in Renaissance 2.0 is the architecture, the building. Is there anything else about this Renaissance 2.0 world we're moving into that you think could be different? Or maybe just something that you encourage people to think about as we transition to this new kind of world?
Yeah, so the idea with money being, with value being a representation of time and energy is that if you then have a money that is actually time and energy or represents or stores time and energy, then using that money system would allow all of us to store our time and energy. Mm-hmm. So money, as it becomes less valuable, it is really confiscating, we talk about that it's confiscating your purchasing power, but it's really confiscating your value, and your value is your time and your energy. So as that money is becoming less valuable, it's confiscating the time that you had to spend to earn it, right? And it's also forwardly confiscating the future time that you're going to have to spend because you're going to have to spend even more time to earn the same amount of money or the same amount of things that you would have when money was more valuable before. So it's time that we really need and want, right? Time is actually the most finite thing for each of us. We all have a truly finite amount of time, and we all have a different amount of time. So storing that time effectively is kind of like the most critical thing that anyone needs. So my thought with Renaissance 2.0 is basically what we're doing when we're returning people's ability to store their time is giving people back the ability to think and, to pause for a second. So if you think about like at an individual level, our time really is being confiscated. We used to watch, 2-hour movies, and then it became 30-minute shows. Instagram Reels are like a minute. And on TikTok, if you don't like the first 3 seconds of a video, you're going to swipe, right? So like our attention spans are being confiscated. And this is like something that we can see at a social level. If you think about going back to buildings, we used to build buildings that took 20 years to build. And we can't even think about building buildings that take 20 years to build now because of how bad money works, how much value is being confiscated, right? So what is the common characteristic of periods in human history where there has been real cultural flourishing? And it is that money has worked well. So money working well provides people the ability to plan for the future with certainty. If I know that my value is not being confiscated, I can start to think about building a building that's going to take me 20 years to build, right? I can have that plan with certainty. So that one idea, I think itself, can be socially contagious. So if everyone is planning for the future with certainty, certainty is like translates to hope to me. Like it's difficult to be optimistic about tomorrow when on some level you understand that the hamster wheel that you're on is getting harder and harder to turn every day, right? So we talk a lot about what fixing the money might do, and I'm more in. We actually know a lot about how the world worked before central banking when money did actually work. Like it's not like money has never worked before. During the 19th century in Europe, there was money worked really well for 115 years. And during that time, that's when people were writing great symphonies, inventing electricity and the light bulb and the telephone, and building all these incredible buildings that are still the ones that people go and travel today. So to me, it's obvious that once we get people back in a situation where money works and people can start planning for the future again, we're going to start to see low time preference societies where we can actually make decisions that are good for everyone for the long term, instead of everything being disposable, everything being urgent to now. In paper money societies where everything is a Band-Aid fix on a bullet wound, the answer is always more money printing and what can we fix immediately. And that just is you know how that problem ends.
Yeah, I mean, we've got hundreds of examples showing how that ends. Paper money always ends in collapse, which is why I think we're both so optimistic about Bitcoin. I think that's a beautiful note to end it on, Scott. I'm going to put links to your incredible book and your company down below. Where can the people reach out to find you online?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter way too much.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, totally. The handle is Lantern Bitcoin.
Nice.
Yeah.
And any final comments? Is there anything you think we might have missed today that you want to leave the listeners with?
Yeah, I think like the best thing I could say is the earlier you can stop thinking about price. Everyone wants to know about price. It's the most exciting thing when you're early on. It's not to say that price isn't going to be the thing that changes your life. My suggestion is that price is actually not the thing that will change any Bitcoiner's life. And, the Tao of Bitcoin is like, what is the Tao of Bitcoin? The Tao of Bitcoin to me is a sense of tranquility that accompanies a comprehension of energy money. So when you truly understand what this means for your ability to store your own time, you'd be less worried about the number of pieces of paper that thing is worth. Most people, what they're trying to do with money is really just achieve a level of autonomy over their own life. Like I really think that like some people want to be rich, but not everybody wants to be rich. What people want is to have authority and autonomy over their time because it's the one finite thing. So that's my final thought.
I think it's a good one as well because a lot of people, I've got a lot of messages recently as Bitcoin's ran from 60K to 90 odd thousand dollars and like, oh, should I buy Bitcoin? Luke, you were right. I'm like, what? No, I'm not right. Bitcoin's up by $30,000. Wake me up when it's up by $300,000, like or $3 million. I agree. I don't think price is that interesting. I don't think that's what's going to change people's life. My life has been changed since I found Bitcoin, not because a number go up. People think, oh, you were early in Bitcoin. Not really. I haven't been that early in Bitcoin. And really what's made the biggest changes in my life was discovering, hang on a minute, money should be tied to energy. The government is lying to me about that. What else are they lying to me about? And it's exploring those rabbit holes and just the ideals of truth, integrity, and all of these other ideas that a lot of Bitcoiners hold sacred. Those are the things that have changed my life a lot. And I think just the idea of energy money as well is, some of our greatest minds of the past 150 years have been obsessing over energy money. Henry Ford, Nikola Tesla, the light bulb inventor whose name is escaping my mind right now. Bingo. Thomas Edison, Henry Ford. There's been a number of really revolutionary people who've been talking about this since the late 1800s and early 1900s. So to go back to your original answer, I think it is a lot more impactful than the price. Like the fact that we've discovered energy money.
It's like the most exciting invention of all time, by far.
Easily.
Yeah.
Easily. Another good friend of both of ours, Alex Svetsky, was just in the podcasting room about 20 minutes ago. And if he was here, he would be screaming, Bitcoin has created a new era, AB and BB. He kind of created this idea of there is a world before Bitcoin, BB, and there will be a world after Bitcoin, the discovery of energy money. I think that's a nice note to end it on, Scott. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Boom.